spiel writes, so does the president have a point in claiming a potential perjury trap if he sits down with these investigators?
Yeah, sure he does. This is partly a negotiating ploy because he wants, and his lawyer Rudy Giuliani wants to limit the scope of the Mueller questioning, so it's useful for them to make this point. But at the same time, the president talks in a very indisciplined way sometimes, and it wouldn't be very difficult for trained lawyers, and there are plenty of them on the Mueller team, to catch him in inaccuracies, whether those were deliberate deceits or whether they were kind of bravado. So, yeah, it's legitimate, but it's also convenient.
Well, how about those who say that, you don't have anything to worry about in a perjury trap if you just tell the truth?
Well, that's true, but just to take, for example, what the president said about being able to run the Mueller investigation if he wanted to. That was I took that as a sort of jokey bravado. Of course he wouldn't be able to do it. It's just a kind of extension of the legal advice he has, that he has lots of flexibility. So he says things which get him into trouble and people take seriously. So, he's not the kind of witness that someone like Giuliani would want to put on the stand.
He also said in the interview, I'm going to read you another quote from that. He said, so if I say something that Comey says something, and it's my word against his, and he's best friends with Mueller, so Mueller might say, well, I believe Comey. And even if I'm telling the truth, that makes me a liar. That's no good. I mean, really, in this case, it's a one-man jury, and that one-man jury is Robert Mueller.
Yeah, look, Robert Mueller can believe whichever witnesses he wishes to believe. I think that President Trump puts things in a very blunt way, so the contrast between himself and Comey being Mueller's friend is a very good way of setting it up in front of the public to say this is a real problem. I don't know whether Robert Mueller would do such a thing. I kind of doubt it.
All right, Hugo, we'll see and have more about this throughout the hour. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Sandra.
Meanwhile, President Trump ramping up his rhetoric against the U.S. intelligence community, what he is saying about James Clapper amid his growing feud with former CIA Director John Brennan. Senator James Lankford joins us live to weigh in.
Plus, amid the growing Mideast tensions, Iran reveals a fighter jet that they say is capable of carrying a variety of weapons. We'll discuss that and more with former Governor Mike Huckabee.
And a stunning development in a triple murder. We have got new details on this shocking confession from the husband just ahead.
My God, who could do that to two little girls?
Always going to be a one-sided story because she's not here to tell her story. And no matter how it happened, it shouldn't have happened.
New developments in the feud between President Trump and former CIA Director John Brennan. And Trump saying he welcomes a lawsuit threatened by John Brennan in response to him revoking his security clearance. He also took to Twitter this morning saying this about the former Director of National Intelligence. Even James Clapper has admonished John Brennan for having gone totally off the rails. Maybe Clapper's being nice to me so he doesn't lose his security clearance for lying to Congress. Let's bring in Oklahoma Senator James Lankford, who serves on the Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees. Senator, thank you for your time this morning. I'll ask you to weigh in on this security clearance debate that seems to be still bubbling up. What do you think?
Quite frankly, most Americans that I've talked to and most Oklahomans certainly are a little confused why they still have their security clearance after they left the last administration. A security clearance is not just a forever institution. It has to be renewed frequently, and it's there for a purpose, so you have access to classified information when you need it. They don't need that classified information at this point. They're not in the administration any longer. They're not in an environment where they have a need to know on this. And so it is very different. And so for Brennan to be able to step out and to say the president's treasonous and to be able to attack him every day, the president's just simply responding with this person's irrational. He doesn't need to be able to have security clearance anymore. It seems like a pretty straightforward response.
And now the president and his legal team saying sort of, bring it on, if you will. If you want to take legal action, go ahead and do it. The president wrote this in another tweet yesterday. I hope John Brennan, the worst CIA director in our country's history, brings a lawsuit. It will then be very easy to get all of his records, texts, emails, and documents to show not only the poor job he did, but how he was involved with the Mueller rigged witch hunt. He won't sue. It's sort of a taunting, if you will, by the president. What do you think?
Right. It's the president's style, and it's not my style on it in any way. But the president's basically pushing back on Brennan, making all these statements and over again attacking the president. I think the president should rise above it and to be able to say that's previous administration still with an axe to grind, that they're favorable to the previous administration. They handed materials to President Obama, and those proved to be right or not right. I think he can step out and be able to just stand above it and move on. The more he talks about it, the more he gives Brennan a microphone.
And, and obviously the big picture discussion here is the importance of those security clearances and who should have them. And the president also said this: everybody wants to keep their security clearance. It's worth great prestige and big dollars, he writes, even board seats. And that is why certain people are coming forward to protect Brennan. It certainly isn't because of the good job he did. He is a political hack. A last word on that. I want to move on to something else. Go ahead.
No, my last word on that is security clearance is not some asset that you can go monetize. You have a security clearance so that you can serve the American people. And if you plan to be able to go monetize that after the fact, that's a very different issue. And so the president has every right to be able to pull that away from somebody, and he's exercised that right. But again, end of the day, the president can rise above it, and he's the president of the United States.
And now this news, new evidence that there are foreign actors trying to infiltrate our election system, Senator Langford. Microsoft is now saying that it's discovered and shut down a Russian operation aimed at hacking the Senate and target conservative think tanks, and that these attacks, they're reporting, were thwarted last week. Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, said this in a New York Times interview: "We are now seeing another uptick in attacks. What is particular in this instance is the broadening of the type of websites that they're going for. The Russians are seeking to disrupt and divide." What do you know about this, Senator?
So the Russians are not just focused on elections. Obviously, a lot of our conversation in the past 2 years has been their focus around the 2016 elections. But the Russians were engaged in 2014 in trying to be able to find ways to divide. The Russians had more activity online trying to divide Americans after the elections of 2016 than they were leading up to even 2016. So they've not stopped. There's really two different issues here. One is trying to be able to get out and try to put out basically their version of propaganda to try to divide Americans every way they can on social media and news, try to find ways to infiltrate. Another one is to try to break in, hack, and steal. The second thing that Microsoft is focused in on is what they're doing to try to hack and steal information, whether that be from think tanks, which they did before the 2016 election, which they're trying to do again, whether it be try to break into the Senate and be able to steal things. People forget the Russians were able to break into the DNC with a phishing attack to be able to pretend basically it was a legitimate site. John Podesta actually typed in the password then and gave them the password by hitting a phishing scam on it. They're still trying to do the exact same thing to be able to hack into different systems now.
Big question is, what are we going to do about it? Senator James Langford, thank you for your time this morning, sir. Nice to see you.
You bet. Thank you.
And we have the Fox News alert on the tragic and heartbreaking end, apparently, in the search for Molly Tibbetts, the 20-year-old University of Iowa student who's been missing for just over a month. We're now learning that the Sheriff's Department in Brooklyn, Iowa, will be holding a news conference at 5 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. This news conference coming as our own Matt Finn just broke the news that two sources telling him that Molly's body has been found in Iowa. No other details at the moment. We will get more on this story as it comes in. Plus, Chicago police say it will take more than officers on the streets to try and stem that horrendous violence in the city that is under siege. 58 people shot over this weekend just alone, and no signs that it will end. Gary McCarthy, running for mayor against Rahm Emanuel, will join us with his answers on what to do to try and stem this continuing carnage in Chicago when we return here in America's Newsroom on the Fox News Channel.
Crime isn't just about what the police do. Crime is about what the criminals do. Let's not forget, the police aren't the ones out there doing it. We look at crime every day, every hour, and we readjust. But there's only so much the police can do. We cannot be on every street corner of this city every moment of the day. We just can't. That's an impossibility.
Chicago authorities speaking out after another violent weekend in Chicago. At least 57 people shot from Friday night until Monday morning. 7 of them killed. despite the deployment of more than 600 additional police officers to neighborhoods hardest hit by this violence. Gary McCarthy, a former Chicago superintendent of police, he's now also running for mayor against Rahm Emanuel. He joins us now. Welcome back to the program, Gary.
Good morning, Sandra. Thank you.
As you know, I am born and raised in Chicago. Hate to see this happening. I know you live downtown there. You hear gunfire in some of the nicest neighborhoods. What is happening? What are we doing about it? By the way, we've reached out to Rahm Emanuel's office for comment this morning because he's been quiet. We have not gotten a response. Your thoughts this morning?
Well, you know what we're missing, and you heard Eddie Johnson actually just say it. We can't put a police officer on every corner. Crime reduction is not about putting a police officer on every corner. As a matter of fact, Chicago has more officers per capita than just about any large city in the country. In fact, we rank number 3 behind places like Baltimore and Newark, New Jersey, as far as officers per capita. Crime reduction is about who, when, and where crime is committed and intercepting that from happening. It's not just about deployment. And I'm not sure that that's being done. The crime strategy that we put together was considered the gold standard in the country. People were coming from all over the country and even internationally to look at our gang violence reduction strategy that was created in conjunction with some of the brightest minds in the country, like Charlie Beck from LA, who recently retired, helped us put together the whole concept of stopping the next shooting by deploying where the next shooting was supposed to happen, not everybody responding to the scene of the shooting. It's the same gun laws that were in effect 3 years ago when we had record lows. We had 50-year lows in the murder rate when I was superintendent. And at the end of the day, that plan, I don't believe, is being followed today.
Well, that seems to be the direction that Rahm Emanuel has gone. We tried to dig up the last time he spoke publicly because his office has not issued a statement, not to us, and not publicly as we can see since the weekend. He said, who provides a 13-year-old a gun? Why does the 13-year-old go to a basketball game with a gun that's held in a Park District facility when kids are having fun? Apparently, he said that on Monday. So he is going that route, but you clearly hear a very frustrated police superintendent Eddie Johnson in all of this, acknowledging that the department can only do so much, were his words. He's frustrated, Gary. What do you do? And you're running for mayor. What do you do to solve this?
Well, I don't accept the fact that the police can only do so much. We've already shown, look in New York, 290 murders in a city 3 times the size of Chicago that had 770 in 2016. Policing matters, and at the end of the day, there's blueprints out there of how to do this, but Chicago refuses to do it. Everything that's happening today is a direct result of Rahm Emanuel's actions in 2015 and 2016 when he drove the murder rate up by 80% by conducting a witch hunt in the department. The officers know that nobody has their back. They're concerned about their pensions, their families, their houses, and they're not willing to be the next top news story, which is really problematic because these men and women are courageous. They're hardworking. I always joke that if you switch a New York City police officer and a Chicago officer, the only difference would be the fact that we have different accents. This can be done. But we need leadership, we need a plan, and we need execution, and none of that is happening right now. It's all about the politics.
It's a big task, and we need to be talking about it. Thanks for coming back on the program, Gary McCarthy.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Sandra.
Well, the jury in Paul Manafort's trial set to start deliberations moments from now. You know he is charged with tax and bank fraud. His defense team has been expressing optimism that the jury is going into day 4, but is that really the case? We'll take a look at that deliberation and the trial in a moment.
And President Trump speaking out about the Russia probe in a new interview, saying even if he tells the truth, would Robert Mueller even believe him? Former U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy is here to discuss that and more next. News Alert, day 4 of deliberations underway right now in the tax and bank fraud trial of former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. Manafort's lawyer, Kevin Downing, says the lengthy deliberations could be good for his client.
Is this a good sign for your client that deliberations are continuing?
We believe so.
Manafort's charged with 18 counts of tax evasion, bank fraud, and hiding foreign bank accounts in the first case brought to trial by special counsel Robert Mueller.
And to the Russia investigation now, President Trump making headlines yet again, this time in a new interview with Reuters. The president saying he could run the Russia investigation if he wants to, and expressing concern about sitting down for an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller's team, raising the possibility of what his lawyer Rudy Giuliani has warned could be a so-called perjury trap. The president saying, quote, "Even if I'm telling the truth, that makes me a liar. That's no good." Let's bring in Andrew McCarthy, former U.S. attorney and a Fox News contributor. You know, Andrew, you were a federal prosecutor, covered you for years, and you know how cases are structured. Does the president have a reasonable concern?
Yeah, of course he does. You know, a lot of people like to say, Eric, that the innocent, honest person has nothing to fear by going in to speak to a prosecutor, but that avoids or overlooks the fact that it's the prosecutor, right or wrong, who makes the decision about whether the innocent, honest person is telling the truth or not. And, you know, most cases are fairly complicated, especially when you're talking about homing in on somebody's intent, what they meant by the things that they said. There are almost always multiple witnesses with different perceptions and different recollections about the same events. And the prosecutor has to sort out whether, when these differences inevitably occur, they are the product of innocent mistakes of recollection or whether somebody's lying. So even if somebody is telling the truth and trying hard to tell the truth, the prosecutor could decide otherwise. We saw that in the case of General Flynn, where evidently the first people who spoke to him, the agents who were in the room while he made his statements, decided he was telling the truth. And then later, somebody from Mueller's team came in and decided, you know, the opposite. So that can happen. It's part of the way the game goes.
Yeah, and it seems that the president, you have, a witness, so to speak, who says two separate things. I mean, on one hand, when he was in the Oval Office with Sergei Lavrov and Kislyak, he said that he fired Comey because he was a nut job, basically, and crazy, and it took the pressure off the Russia investigation. Sits down with Lester Holt, says that Russia was on his mind when he fired Comey, but in the same interview, he said that no one tried to stop the investigation. No, he did not try to stop the investigation. He said, I want it done properly. So how does Mueller, pick and choose? You can say on one hand, well, you take A and say that shows he's guilty, but you take B and say shows that the president there's no wrongdoing.
Yeah, well, Mueller has more information than I do, obviously, but I've always thought, Eric, that what was going on here was that Russia was on the president's mind, but it was on his mind in the sense that Director Comey told him on multiple occasions he was not a suspect, and yet Director Comey then made public statements in Congress that suggested that the president was a suspect. And I think Russia was on his mind to the extent that there was a misimpression out in the public that he was a suspect in the investigation, and that's what he was concerned about, not Russia per se, but what people thought of their president in connection with that allegation that there was collusion between the Kremlin and his campaign.
Why would Comey apparently say two different things?
Well, I'd be very concerned about that if I were the president. I think the reason he said two different things was what he said to Congress was the way they were carrying the investigation, which was collusion between Kremlin elements and people who were attached to the campaign, not necessarily the president. And I think when he spoke to the president privately, he probably had a more descriptive conversation assuring the president that he personally was not a suspect.
And there's one other factor, finally, I want to get into, and that is the dynamics when you're in a grand jury. You can't have your defense attorney in. The prosecutors basically run it. Right. And here is Kristen Davis, the so-called Manhattan Madam, who's friends with Roger Stone, last night talking to Martha McCallum about what she witnessed when she was in the grand jury. She testified about those dynamics. Take a listen.
I think they're legitimately investigating whether collusion happened. Yeah. But their attitude is that, they're prosecutors in a room with a grand jury that they have a relationship with. They've been there for months. They seem to be on joking and fun sort of camaraderie in there, which is concerning. But there's nobody there to present another set of facts, and that also is concerning to me.
Are jurors swayed by their relationships with the prosecutors if there's that connection, and are you troubled by that?
Well, I'm not troubled by it because it's the way that the grand jury works. But the fact of the matter is, when you have these special grand juries, I assume this is a special grand jury, they're together for 18 months and there's no defense lawyer. So you can expect that dynamic to take place.
All right, Andrew McCarthy, who has done yeoman's work on terrorism back in 1993 with the World Trade Center attack, the first one. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, Colorado husband and father Christopher Watts has now been formally charged with murdering his pregnant wife and their 2 daughters, as Watts claims his wife killed the girls before he killed her. Alicia Acuna has more on this from Denver. Alicia?
Hi, Sandra. Yes, according to the arrest affidavit, Chris Watts is trying to put part of the blame on his pregnant wife, Shanann. He is charged with killing her, their 2 daughters, and their unborn child. At a news conference the Weld County District Attorney held to announce charges, Shanann's father stepped to the mics briefly.
I am Shanann's dad. This is her brother. We would like to thank everyone in the Federal Police Department and all the agencies involved for working so hard to find my daughter, granddaughters, and Nico.
Nico is the name of Shanann's unborn son. According to the affidavit, Chris Watts told investigators his wife returned from a business trip around 2 in the morning on August 13th and that the two had a conversation about separating. He told law enforcement he had been having an affair, and Watts says after that conversation with his wife, he saw her strangling one of their daughters on the baby monitor, that she had killed both Celeste and Bella. According to the arrest documents, quote, Chris said he went into a rage and ultimately strangled Shanann to death. Chris said he loaded all 3 bodies into the back seat of his work truck and took them to an oil work site. You'll remember Chris Watts initially told police, his neighbors in Frederick, Colorado, and the media that his wife and kids disappeared, even asking for their safe return, although he did admit there was tension right before they supposedly vanished.
It wasn't like an argument. We had an emotional conversation, but I'll leave it at that. But I just want them back. I just want them to come back.
Chris Watts is expected back in court this morning. Sandra.
Alicia Acuna, thank you.
And there's new reaction pouring in this morning after Iran reveals a new fighter jet that they say is capable of carrying a variety of weapons. And President Rouhani, well, he actually was seen taking a seat inside that jet. We will discuss what this means with former Governor Mike Huckabee coming up.
Plus, President Trump praising immigration enforcement agents, calling them heroes, and slamming Democrats for being soft on crime. Former acting ICE Director Thomas Homan will be our headliner this morning, top of the hour.
The extremists who attack ICE and CBC like to portray themselves as champions of social justice. They are not.
It's a question of the highest importance for the United States that Iran never get a deliverable nuclear weapons capability. It's why President Trump withdrew from the wretched Iran nuclear deal. It's why he is reimposing economic sanctions.
Well, National Security Advisor John Bolton calling on European countries to increase pressure on Iran. Meanwhile, amid growing tensions in the Middle East, Iran unveils a new fighter jet as Tehran continues to develop its arms industry. Let's bring in the former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, now. And what we know about that fighter jet, Governor Huckabee, was that it was domestic made, capable of carrying various weapons, and will be used for short aerial support missions. That's according to the local news agency there. Serious stuff.
We can't take anything for granted. I can't imagine that they could build a fighter that is anywhere near the capability of America's new F-35 that both the U.S. and Israel have. But you just don't want to take the chance. And the one thing we've learned throughout history is that appeasement never works. That's why we've got to play tough with Iran. But they're dealing with a problem on 2 fronts. One is the external, the pressure that we're putting on them, the sanctions that we've reimposed. This is incredibly important. The president is absolutely doing the right thing in pushing for that. But the second issue is the internal. Their economy is in tatters. Their people are growing angrier by the day. And between the two, let's hope that something happens that will bring a collapse to this totalitarian regime that is intent on destroying everyone who is not a Shiite.
You know, Trump and Netanyahu have been closely aligned on their approach to Iran since we saw President Trump take office. He's consistently looking to put pressure on him. He's used words like what he has seen, a change of behavior regarding its weapons programs, its destabilizing activities in the region, accusations Iran denies. What do you make of this administration's overall approach, particularly since you've seen President Trump step in?
I think it's an important alliance that has been rebuilt between the U.S. and Israel. Let's keep in mind that the Iranians have openly declared, I'm not talking about uncovered secret documents from some cache of hidden things. This is openly what they've said in public, on television, and even at the UN, that Israel is the little Satan and America is the great Satan, and they're going to wipe us from the face of the earth. I'm going to ask you, if somebody said that they were going to kill another person, don't you think we ought to take that seriously, especially when they're loading up every gun and bullet they can and stockpiling them? Of course we take it seriously. And we would be idiots, and very dangerous idiots, if we didn't take Iran seriously, because they've never kept a promise. They've always tried to kill Americans and kidnap Americans through terrorist-sponsored activities across the world. And it's really going to come down to there's going to be a survivor. It'll be us or them. I'd like to vote for us.
What did you make of the optics of all that? When they rolled out this new fighter jet, the state television showed live pictures of the ceremony they were holding in Tehran. If the actual jet flew in the presence of President Hassan Rouhani, and this was the day before the country's National Defense Industry Day, Governor.
I think a lot of this is some bluster. I mean, the fact is, if you really have an effective weapon, you don't have to announce it. It's kind of like having a mad dog in your yard that's going to protect you. You don't have to put the sign out. You just need to let him be there. The fact that they're making such a big deal of what they have tells me it's not that big a deal. But once again, I want to emphasize, you can't ever let your guard down when you're dealing with murderous thugs like you're dealing with the Iranian government. These are not nice people that want to sit down and negotiate. They want to blast the world back to the 7th century, and we can't stand by and let them at least attempt to do it. They have to be stopped.
Well, there's that picture I was referencing there with Rouhani standing by as they unveiled that new jet. Governor Mike Huckabee, always good to see you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Well, there's a new debate now over 3D guns as a judge is set to decide whether to allow the public to have access to blueprints to make those weapons using 3D printers at home. We'll have a live report on that next.
Georgia exploding. Take a look at this. The explosion rocking the small city of Homerville, blasting the building's brick walls and injuring 3 employees that were inside. Authorities say a gas leak leaked into a sewer line connecting to the coffee shop and was ignited by a spark.
Wow. Good thing that wasn't worse. Well, meanwhile, the decision is expected soon on whether or not a Texas man can repost blueprints for printing a 3D gun on the internet. A federal judge in Seattle hearing arguments later on today on that. Dan Springer is live in Seattle with more on what we can expect. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Eric, the hearing starts here in Seattle in about 2 hours. 8 states, including Washington, will be asking a federal judge to make his temporary restraining order a preliminary injunction. That would prevent the publishing of blueprints allowing people to make 3D guns using a 3D printer until a lawsuit is decided. The TRO was issued July 31st, the day before a Texas company planned on putting on its website the codes for making a 3D handgun called the Liberator. It's an all-plastic gun that would be undetectable by an X-ray machine or metal detector. Critics say it could be used by terrorists, criminals, mentally ill, and others who are not allowed to possess firearms would be able to make the gun, and the guns would have no serial numbers, so they would be untraceable. Under federal law, you can make a gun for strictly personal use, but for the last 30 years, it's been illegal to make a gun that is undetectable, and President Trump supports that law. But the administration is being sued right now because it settled a lawsuit brought by Cody Wilson. He's the owner of Defense Distributed, which wants to publish the 3D gun codes online. Wilson argues that preventing him from publishing is a violation of his free speech rights. The Trump administration finally agreed. But in issuing his restraining order last month, District Court Judge Robert Lasnik wrote, quote, "The proliferation of these firearms will have many of the negative impacts on a state level that the federal government once feared on the international stage." The issue has sparked protests by gun control groups, but the fact is 3D guns are extremely expensive to make and unreliable at best. The cheapest 3D printer needed to make a plastic gun costs about $5,000. Most of the guns would only shoot once before breaking apart, and the shooter would likely be in the most danger at this point. But this hearing today is really about looking down the road when technology will get better and making 3D guns actually could become widespread. Eric?
All right, Dan, thanks so much. Sandra?
We are following the breaking news out of Iowa from just a few moments ago where the body of college student Molly Tibbetts has now been found dead. More details as police prepare to hold a news conference. Plus, President Trump honoring ICE agents at the White House while denouncing a blue wave, saying it would mean open borders and more crime. Former acting ICE director and newly minted Fox News contributor Thomas Homan will be here to weigh in on all of that next hour. Join us at the top of the 10.